Good afternoon. Welcome to Not the Lunchtime Talk. I'm very used to standing here. I'm Tom Abbott. I'm an Associate Professor in Art and Design at UE in Bristol, and I'm Director of the Digital Cultures Research Centre. A little bit more about that in a minute. Some housekeeping for anybody who's not been at the studio before, or even if you have been. We are not expecting a fire alarm, as far as I know, so if there is one, members of the studio staff will escort you to the appropriate fire exits. There is a quiet room to my left and your right if you feel need to take a break at any point. Toilets are past the large ladder there along the corridor. There is a microwave. Please don't use it during the talk. And tea and coffee are available. That's the housekeeping out of the way. Didn't miss anything, did I? Lovely. Just to say also, this talk is BSL interpreted and live captioned on YouTube. I'm going to get out of the way after a very brief intro. We began this series of talks 2 months ago, as a way of sharing projects in progress, bringing together some disparate bits of the Digital Cultures Research Centre and enabling kind of broader conversations around the work that we do. So this is the third in the series. There will be a last slide at the end of this announcing the fourth. I am delighted to introduce Erinma Ochu, Sambourne and Tom Marshman. There will be time for Q&A at the end. The talk will be around about 40 minutes, if everybody keeps the time. Amy will be handling the questions from the live chat, and I'll be wandering around with a mic if anybody's in the room. Other than that, Erinma, I'm going to get out of the way.
Thanks, Tom. I realise there's no need to rush. Okay, so hello. Really great to see people. Both, hopefully I'm standing in the right place. Yes. In person and online, obviously. So we titled this Performing AI Stories. We kind of came up with that over lunch at one point, didn't we? My bit of it is to talk about unfinished AI experiments. I've done quite a few of them. I'm a kind of starter, not really good at completing, but I think that's okay. Sometimes you need to make things that go out in the world and they go on and do other things. So I should say the cake is courtesy of my mentor, Simon Chaplin. So thank you, Simon, for the cake. If you didn't get any, I think it's in the kitchen. For the people online, we could maybe describe how delicious it is. I don't know, I haven't tried it. So yeah, I'm Erinma and Ochu. My surname is pronounced like a sneeze. So Ochu, and you can imagine that in COVID, that was a bit of a problem. You know, people ask you, what's your surname? You're like, Ochu, and they're like, oh, step away, get away from the counter. I've had to turn that into a joke because my experiences of being a black person under COVID were not great. So to give a visual description of myself, I'm wearing a black jean jacket, blue jeans, black shirt. I'm going to just say I've got grey hair now. It used to say it's peppercorn, but like it's just not. It's grey, and black glasses. I don't think that the blue and the black match very well, but I'm going to give myself a break on that. Fashion is not my thing, and but I did notice actually that the black and the blue are articulated in my shoe. So there you go, a bit of poetry and black and blue working out there. So. We're going to talk about AI stories, and I'd like you to kind of think about an AI story that comes to mind for you. Is it a book? Is it a movie? Is it a game? Is it a play? Maybe it's a VR piece. I'm interested in kind of the connection between the stories that are performed about AI in the movies, in games and so on, and the subcultures that create them, their kind of world-making potential. And then to what extent we think, feel, and act in relation to AI in our everyday lives. So yeah, have a think. How have you encountered AI? Maybe it's something that's actually happened and is not imagined in the movies. For me, next slide. To remind myself of being human, this is my algorithm, and I get it from the brilliant bell hooks. And these things are really important. I'm really lucky as a biologist who had a dream that they would end up in the arts, and me standing here before you, that's the dream became a reality. It took 20 years, But hey, thank you, Mandy, for hiring me on that one. Biology, though, has a lot to answer for. I'm really loving the integrated BSL. Thank you, whoever sorted that out, and the integrated captions online. We haven't got time to get into it, but biology is the study of life, and it has a lot to answer for in terms of which bodies, which minds, which ways of living and being count, and which knowledge as being considered as intelligent. So in between culturing some cells in a laboratory 20 odd years ago, a lot longer, grey hair, remember, I used to, while my cells were doing their thing, and I put drugs on them, which is what you did, to try and stop them from living. I would get them to try and commit suicide. Anyway, another story, long story. I would go to the movies. I'd go and see independent movies at the corner house. And one day I encountered an art piece. It's also an art centre, and I encountered an art piece that was a piece between a biologist and an artist, a designer, Helen Story, and her biologist sister. And I was like blown away. It was a dress. Again, I don't like fashion, but it was a dress that was showing the first 1,000 days of the production of an embryo, and it was in dress form, and I was like blown away. And I read the small print that this was a collaboration between an artist and a biologist, and I was like, oh, that's what I want to do, but I don't know how to. And then I went back to my lab, and I was like thinking about the dress, but not the dress, the concept, and doing my experiments and thinking, how will I get there? Skip to just thinking about this notion of technology and the kind of real world of technology. We've got this imagined world of technology, but the real world of technology, it's always been part of human existence, and we have this desire to create artificial life, which stretches back into history. But for me, I have to admit, it manifested in me in wanting to do biology experiments and understanding, actually what makes people tick. And the experiments I was doing was not really touching on that, if I'm perfectly honest. But I got a PhD, so that's all good. So this lecture series by the Real World of Technology by Canadian experimental physicist Ursula M. Franklin, she gives a really interesting perspective, because she looks at technology as ideas and dreams and practices and procedures and hopes and myths. And she also describes extended reality as a body of knowledge and emotions we acquire that is based on the experience of others. It's this extension of our own reality through technology as practice that creates our world, and it's guided by our values, beliefs, and culture. So, if you don't read books and you like to listen to podcasts, this is online as podcasts, and or you can read the transcripts. But then I kind of an in-between project, and Marika's like, yes, Marika Novin there. We did this really interesting project called Chewing Sunflowers in 2012, and these are our data points. These are our data points, and they just don't tell the story of this project that was all about Alan Turing. But it was the first moment in which my kind of personal values, who cared about injustice against being queer, and being able to devise a biology experiment with a computational biologist who was another rogue who'd left in academia. We were both kind of independent rogues at that point. And we came together to do this experiment to finish Alan Turing's last unfinished experiment on thinking about the patterns in sunflowers. And the marks that you see is me trying to count around the spirals. And these sunflowers were archived in the Museum of Science Industry. And it doesn't say that Erinma discovered this sunflower that has number patterns unknown to mathematicians or biologists. And sunflowers have these number patterns called Fibonacci numbers and variations of. But this sunflower that we discovered still looks like a sunflower, has these spiral patterns, but it doesn't have number patterns known to mathematicians and biologists. And that's like a beautiful thing, that nature's found a way to do something that we couldn't model doesn't speak to the stories that we had. We composed music, we sang songs using Fibonacci numbers and not Fibonacci numbers. We brought the whole queer community together in Manchester, and we got people raised attention of the injustice of Alan Turing's persecution and arrest and subsequent death. So that's a kind of unfinished piece, and the publication that sits behind this, where everyone who'd grown sunflowers and made these data sets, it's really important that we could share back the pictures that they'd submitted, because they owned that data. But yeah, so for me, it speaks to that need to perform and express ourselves outside of the uniformity of the mainstream. And I would love if there's someone out there who ever comes across this paper, don't just look at the story that says, Alan Turing was right, sunflowers have Fibonacci numbers. Look at the story that says there's this one sunflower out of all of these 700 sunflowers that nobody knows how it's made up. And that's a beautiful, mystical thing, and I love that. But it also took me into thinking about environmental perspectives, and I spent a whole year just growing and like being in the soil and getting dirty. It was great. So I'm kind of talking about the cultures that have brought me into the work that I do now. During lockdown, I was really lucky to be surrounded by these amazing people who I, apart from Caroline, hadn't met in real life. And we were the Racial Justice Fellows funded by AHRC. So Caroline, Sarah, Yasmin and Irene, and facilitated by the amazing Louise Hickman. I would really encourage you to look up their work, because everyone cites Black Americans and the work that they do around AI. Do look at these people's work. And Louise does some great stuff on CRIP AI and AI in the workplace and manufacturing. But the power for me with this group of people was the power of collectivity and what it means to work together in the face of oppression. Like, loads of people wanted to invest in Black and disabled and queer folk, and no one could have curated a better bunch of people than us. And we hadn't met, and it was like amazing. But people were so curious about us and what are you thinking? What are you thinking? And we had to create a kind of backstage and then a front stage for how we were in public with people who wanted to know what we were thinking about when our work hadn't been published. And Louise did a great feminist act to create a community agreement with us and with the people that were funding us, so LSE and the Ada Lovelace Institute, for when they came into our lab space, which was online, that they had to hold themselves accountable to how they were in the space, and that work wasn't on us, and really amazing work. So do please check out these people. So yeah, I love these people. I truly love them. So to patterns in practice, just very quickly, there's loads of hyped definitions of AI, but Bernadetta Bravini spells it out. It is a collection of technologies that combine data, algorithms, and computing power, advances in computing, and the increasing availability of data. And there's this upsurge in that, but it also really talks about the exacerbated problem of scarce resources in production, consumption, disposal, and the problem of waste and pollution. That is the definition that I'm going with. We can pretend that it's other things, but we've got to think about the whole supply chain of how and where AI is performed and how it affects people in different cultures and contexts. So just very briefly to introduce Patterns in Practice, which is the project that I brought here. And we were interested in values, beliefs, and the cultures in which practitioners were using AI, machine learning and data in a range of settings. The arts was one, higher education was another, and the last one was chem informatics. Yes, it was. But these are the people behind making that project happen. So Joe Bates is the lead investigator, coming up with a brilliant idea. Helen Kennedy, Monica Fratzowitz, and Itzel Medina Pereira. Sambourne, who's going to speak next. Hadley Beresford. On the watershed side, we had this artist in residence, so Craig Scott, so Vic Tillison, Martin O'Leary, Tony Bajam, who really helped us around thinking deeply about inclusion. When we had kind of questions that we were unsure about how to do things. Tony was really clear on making us think for ourselves, and I think that's a really important message, not telling us the answers. And then Toju Duke, who was one of our dialogue partners, and then Tom Marshman, who's going to speak. So yeah, just really grateful to all of those people. But also behind the scenes, there's a bunch of people who aren't on that slide. So Amy Densley, Nick Triggs, Catherine Smith, Abby Rogers, Torise, Elassi, Georgios, Stratos, they did the hiring and the finance and the contracts and the making the grant come to life, and that took a while. And Joe Lansdowne said yes, which is fantastic, and Faraha Asani is always supportive as research lead. So that project was focused on beliefs, values, emotions, and practitioner engagements. I'm not going to talk about the research too much. It was qualitative. Monica and Itzel, who you see here, did all the qualitative interviews, so it's a social science project. But these themes came out of it. I've highlighted the purple one because I liked that theme, where the magic happens. Feeding the machine, call for collaboration, meaningful work. We interviewed all these people who work in these contexts. And now we're taking these themes. And for me, it's really important to be affected by the research that you do. So the thing that's really affecting me is, what's my position around artificial intelligence now? How do I want to engage with it? And how do I have those kind of conversations with practitioners about how they're wanting to move forward with this work? I don't want it to be that we did a project, we came up with these themes, we published like loads of papers, which we have done, or will do, and we went to conferences and stuff. I really want it to be that it affects us in how we consider how we do it. Machine learning is completely pervasive now in society, and sometimes I don't even know where it is exactly. But we need to have more stories about the ways in which we resist, the ways in which we can be creative, the ways in which we can focus on where the magic happens. But it needs to go into detail. So I'm going to do, hopefully, a special collection around performing AI stories, thinking about these themes and calling for others to tell us about their AI stories, whether they're real or imagined. And to Roman Amaro to say, I think it's really important to focus on this is thinking back to that sunflower that kind of stood out for me. Roman Amaro's work on the black technical object, I'll skip to the last bit, but this idea, this supernatural belief, vague idea of data in which the West has placed its confidence, and I think the arts, we can really think about that, loses its efficacy when faced with the very real notion of a life outside its own obsession with social administration. And I really invite people to kind of really think on that quote quite deeply. I mentioned Craig and his work. Craig has performed here before, but there are other people doing amazing things with artificial intelligence. There's a great program coming up with some projects that have been commissioned, more than AI sandbox. Make sure you look out for that. Emma's in charge of that as producer, I believe, so talk to Emma. And then Hermaphogenesis, Marshman Gowan, the interdisciplinary artist, has made this interactive experience, and it's been developed through Copenhagen Doc Lab. He was one of our students here, which is fantastic, and is off making really interesting work to reimagine and think about fixed systems and how they can be broken, and using machine learning to do that by thinking about different ways in which body organs can be put together and rearranged. I mean, that's amazing stuff. For a biologist who's in a lab who wanted to get in the arts, I'm in the right place. Thank you very much.
Hello. For those that don't know me, my name is Sambourne, and I work as an Impact Research Associate on the Patterns in Practice project. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about what I do creating impact with this project. But to start things off, the theme of today's talk is storytelling. And I wanted to give you all a bit of context for my work, but I want to try and create a little story around it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you saw there was a total eclipse in some parts of the world the other week. In Bristol, we just missed out on seeing any sort of eclipse, but I'm not going to let that stop me. So I decided to run with a bit of a space theme. So let's go back to the start. 3 years ago, there was nothing. And then one day, Patterns in Practice was born, bursting into life like a bright, shining star in the night sky. The project wants to explore how our beliefs, feelings, and values interact and shape our engagement with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And to do this, Patterns in Practice carried out research in 3 professional contexts: higher education, the creative arts, and drug discovery. Now, this makes up the central research in Patterns in Practice, and you can see these orbiting closely around the Patterns in Practice star. But that isn't all. In 2023, I joined to help work on the next phase of the project, Impact. And so now we have another ring in the orbit of Patterns in Practice. And on this ring, we have all sorts of stuff happening. We've got a podcast series. We've got dialogue events. We have loads of wonderful partners, such as Craig Scott, who completed an artist residency here at Watershed, where he created an AI-driven electric guitar. We've got the Watershed team. We've got Diverse AI, who we partnered with for a dialogue. And we have the brilliant Tom Marshman, who you're going to hear from after me. And through them, we also have art. And all these different aspects make up the impact orbit. But let's zoom out a little to see how this fits together. So we have the patterns in practice star, the research findings and ideas radiating out, and we have the impact work, which helps communicate the research ideas further, takes the ideas off in new directions, opens up new avenues, and speaks to new audiences. And then, of course, everything we learn and discover is reflected back towards the research and informs future outputs from the patterns in practice star. I hope that gives a little bit of context as to what my impact work is and what it involves. Now, we're all here today in Watershed, a cinema, so I wanted to conclude my space analogy with an appropriate cinematic ending. Today, I'm going to be talking about one strand of impact work, in particular, podcasting. And yeah, that was supposed to be the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, recreated with PowerPoint animation.
It was obvious it was.
Patterns in Practice, Cultures of AI is an ongoing podcast series that I've been working on since around the new year. We have 2 episodes out right now, and we've got another 4 planned over the coming months. Initially, we planned for the series to be 3 episodes, with 1 episode each covering the contexts, the professional contexts in the patterns of practice research, so higher education, creative arts, and drug discovery. But when we were working with Craig on his residency, we thought the podcast would be another great opportunity to share his work too. Tom and I are working on an episode to show his work as well. And then we're going to close off the series with an episode which looks towards the future. And watch this space for more information on that. So that's a little bit about what the series is, but why do a podcast in the first place? As part of the Patterns in Practice, we've already released 3 technical reports, and there will be academic publications and papers to come. Now, these are absolutely vital to any research project. However, if this is all we rely upon for communicating our findings, we're definitely limiting ourselves. We don't want our research to be limited to those who have time to read a paper like this. A podcast offers another output alongside our reports and papers, which someone can easily pick up, listen on their way to work, their lunch break, cooking their tea, or on a walk, wherever convenient for them. It's also a lot less daunting. Over the past few months, our impact work has spread out beyond academia into different professional contexts, and it's so much easier to point someone in the direction of a podcast episode to pick up as an introduction to the project and its ideas. And this leads to the next point, new audiences. We can broaden our audience using a podcast. It's a familiar format for a lot of people, more familiar than a longer written output, and this means it's easier to approach. I've been able to send the episodes we've done so far to family and friends who maybe aren't following the new and latest technological developments in artificial intelligence so closely, and it gives them a way into this topic and our research. Now, this is just my personal network, but the example works on a larger scale too. The podcast format is playful, lighter to engage with, and more approachable, and you can reach new audiences for these reasons. The third benefit is building relationships. Across the episodes so far, we've had 5 guests, and there'll be a lot more to come. And with each of these guests, we establish a connection and a bridge. We exchange ideas about our research and our guests' work. This opens up a dialogue which not only is a great opportunity to expand the research and learn, but hopefully is also entertaining and tells a story. And if everything goes well, our guests will also enjoy what they hear and share the episodes through their own networks. And of course, there's communication. Through a podcast, we can tell stories. In our podcast, it's stories about how different people are using AI, how they interact with it, what their thoughts are. And through these stories, we're constructing knowledge, considering our values, connecting and sharing in a sense of community. When you hear a story from someone on a podcast, it feels real, tangible, and it grounds the content that you're trying to communicate. And you don't just need to take my word for it either. All these benefits have been found by other researchers in a wide variety of contexts as well. Storytelling is how we pass on knowledge. It's how we engage with the world and others. In a research context, it's a way of connecting, sharing, and learning. It's a way of building a community. So hopefully by now you're at least a little bit convinced of some of the benefits. Now I wanted to walk you through how we've told a story about AI by telling you about the building blocks of our episodes. So when you click play, you will hear some music or strange sounds. Now all of the music in our series has been composed and created by Craig Scott, who we worked with on an artist residency. So immediately, before any words have been spoken, you're engaging with someone who is using AI through his creative practice. After this, you'll probably hear my voice giving a little bit of an introduction. I will add some context, explaining what the episode is about, why you're listening to it, and why it's important. This is also the segment where I'll talk to someone from the Patterns and Practice project. In the creative arts episode, that person was Erinma. And the listener gets to hear some broader context, maybe an overview of the issues and the debates. And then we move on to our guests and their stories. We hear anecdotes and insights from a variety of people, each bringing different experiences to the episode's topic. This is where we open up the conversation and the podcast becomes a bit more of a dialogue, and we're engaging and hearing from practitioners themselves. And these interviews all touch on themes from the research in Patterns and Practice, so it's a way of introducing the ideas to the listener. My personal favourite segment so far comes in the second episode, when I'm talking to DCRC's own Rick Lander and Marie-Hélène Boyd about their participatory interactive show around an AI chatbot called I Am Echoborg. And you hear them separately recall a moment in one of the performances where an audience member effectively breaks the fourth wall of the show. And they both reflect on this moment being genuinely funny, emotional, original. From a listener's perspective, we've got this amazing insight into how these creatives are working with AI in a theatrical and dramatic context. The episodes will generally try to come to a conclusion, bringing some of the stories and ideas together, and it will point people in the direction of other resources and other links to resources from the project if they do want to learn more. And so with these different elements, you create stories. In our case, stories about AI, told by lots of people working across all different sectors, but all linked by the Patterns and Practice project. The podcast series and other strands of impact work, for that matter, aren't merely an afterthought to be done near the end of a project, but a crucial part of the research process. Making a podcast and creating content with other people, such as the brilliant guests we've had on our series, is a way to connect, reconsider values, and adapt through creative practice. Storytelling is research, and research is storytelling. Hopefully I've been able to show you how I think podcasting is a great way to do this. Thank you all very much for listening, and there is a QR code if you want to scan it to get a link to the podcast, or you can search it on most podcast players, Patterns Practice, Cultures of AI. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom Marshman. I'm a performer, theatre maker and writer. I'm based in Bristol and I'm based in the studio here. For this talk I'm going to be talking specifically about some work that I did with the adult company at the Bristol Old Vic. So a lot of my work involves collecting stories, and I do this often by hosting tea parties, getting people together, telling their stories, and then I try and work with oral histories and verbatim, and I perform those stories and present them on stage. But also I work a lot in archives, so I try to shine a light on hidden stories, and often those stories are of queer people or people of colour or people that have disabilities in some way. So I'm quite used to kind of uncovering stories that are hidden in archives, shining a light on them, and I kind of call this process about like the rehabilitation of an archive. When I'm sort of leading perhaps workshops with students, I always ask the question like at the beginning, like what is an archive? What does that hold to you? What does that mean to you? And who is in control of that, I suppose. And I just began to see a similarity between like what archives are and what AI is currently at the moment, like places of knowledge and places to store that, I suppose. When I look at documents or archival sources or objects in archives, I have this kind of methodology which is about the bones, the flesh, and the ghosts of an archive. So the bones are like the facts, like what we know. Maybe they're like census reports, that type of thing, birth certificates. And then the ghosts are like what's missing, so the hidden stories or the stories that are not that are not the ones that are kind of being told, the way that we navigate history. And then the flesh is kind of any kind of contextual stuff that might inform those stories. So I work with the adult company at Bristol Old Vic, and they're quite a large group of diverse people from, there's about 25 of them. And I did a sort of weekly session of 2 hours with them for 9 sessions. And they asked me to present some work around like telling personal stories. That was the kind of brief that they gave me, but I wanted to throw something else in the mix to kind of keep it fresh for me. And so I was interested in working in some ways with AI. And I was thinking about like what could be the inspiration, and I fell into this Jeanette Winterson book, which is, I don't know if you've read it, but 12 Bytes, How Artificial Intelligence Will Change the Way We Live and Love. And this is a curious book for me. Specifically, the first essay is about Ada Lovelace. I don't know if you know her story, but she was Byron's daughter, and she was kind of, they tried to steer her away from the kind of poetry that Byron, her father, was kind of stood for, into the kind of world of mathematics. And she ended up working with someone called Babbage. This is my like potted history bit of it. She ended up working with someone called Babbage, who she was really inspired by him, and he was making this mechanical object that was kind of calculating things, and she ended up translating some notes and her notes ended up being more thorough than the translation. And then, like fast forward 100 years or something, Alan Turing picked it up and kind of developed the first computer, I guess, as we know it now. So that was one of the inspirations, really, and I wanted to work with Ada's story with the adult companies group. And I was also very inspired, and always have been inspired, by Laurie Anderson. I went to one of her online lectures, and she talked about a computer that's been developed that stores everything that she's ever written or talked about, or her songs, into one computer, and it can develop any kind of project using her thoughts, her past thoughts. And then also a computer with Lou Reed, her partner, who's now sadly died, anything that he's ever written or any of the interviews he had, and they can kind of collaborate together in this strange place. And I was also inspired by which we've talked a little bit about, the I Am Echo Borg project, which is developed by Rick Lander from the studio here. And there was one moment that we worked with ChatGPT where there's a kind of profile of Ada Lovelace, and you could ask Ada Lovelace any kind of question. We tried to do that with a live audience, which was kind of interesting, but not quite work. We needed a bit more technical know-how, I think. And the other thing that I kind of came into the group with was like, I mean, this is kind of how I make work, but I wanted the group to kind of to begin the work with very personal stories. So I asked the group to make these micro performances about like, what is the story of your name? Which is a very basic kind of exercise, but actually it came up with some really rich material, because the name is kind of steeped in, I don't know, well, the results ended up being sort of, people talked about being an outsider and maybe cultural differences of their name, and and how they felt about it. And it just opened up a rich performance vocabulary that we started to feed AI into. We made a film about the process, which I'd like to show you now. It's a 10-minute film, but we haven't got time for all of that, so I was just going to show you sort of last 5 minutes, isn't it, really? I'm just going to press play and see how we go.
Could you please provide me with your name, and I'll do my best to share information about its origins.
So my name is Erinma O'Neill, and I was a member of the adult company. I really liked the way that it was brought together with the way the AI was created through the microphone.
I wanted to sort of like find a way that we could perform the AI that felt aligned to this kind of bot behavior. It's being kind of adaptable and transformable. So I started to work with the voice transformer. The voice is so connected to one's humanity, and it was something that we could easily play with a microphone and a very simple piece of kit.
As a machine learning model created by OpenAI, I don't have personal beliefs, feelings, or consciousness.
It was very interesting to witness everybody's reactions to the AI and everybody's different perspectives from their different backgrounds across different ages.
People were giving examples of how they used AI. Like one girl had told everyone that she'd inputted her love life history into AI, and then she'd asked it to write her a letter about her love life from the perspective of Carl Jung, which I thought was a really inventive use of AI. It's something I would never have thought to do myself. I definitely do see its uses in ways I didn't before.
I really enjoyed being different with people with different ages and different experiences. And I remember Ellie saying that she got ChatGPT to answer her emails at work. I couldn't actually believe that. And I remember thinking, oh my God, it made me realise how addictive it was, and also how it could become like a friend.
My name's Justin Knapp, and my role was the spoken AI. I don't think I really understood prior to the involvement with the project how much AI is already with us.
My name is Marion Kilpatrick, and I was a member of the adult company here at the Bristol Old Vic. Well, I have to say that I was very resistant to the notion of interacting with AI. I'm a visual artist, I'm a printmaker. A lot of people that I know are messing with AI in terms of image making. I find that slightly concerning, you know, for lots of reasons that, you know, basically you could just tell a machine to make an image and it might be better or preferable or more sellable than something a human has made. It's certainly going to be cheaper. We're interacting with science and maths and technology all the time. You know, a lot of parts of our life are dependent on it in our phone.
Marion can nurture relationships by connecting to others, sharing experiences, and offering support. Of course, these are just some examples of what can make Marion happy, and there are many other factors that can influence their happiness. Ultimately, the best way for Marion to be happy is... Yes? Is to discover what works for them and to practice it regularly.
One of the things that I'm tuning into about, because I work in education, is how it opens opportunities for young people in terms of how they might express themselves, but also maybe there's a danger that it might limit them a little bit. In the last few hundred years, we've gone away from the Renaissance idea and this idea that arts and science are quite separate. Maybe AI is forcing us to think about how they interact again.
I've heard so many conflicting opinions about it. I feel like it might be quite good to scrap it all but start again with these kind of people that I've worked on this project with at the heart of that conversation.
How do we as humans deal with this entity that's now, it's real, it's not, you know, it's a thing now, it's in the world, it's out of the box. Where is our place within this? Do humans then become obsolete? Yeah, it's kind of, it's a bit scary, it's also fascinating, and not something we were going to handle in 10 weeks, I don't think.
It's made me more curious. I'm up for it. That's what I'd say. I'm up for finding out more.
Hashtag maths rules.
Hashtag women in tech.
Hashtag women rule.
Hashtag women in power.
Hashtag, if it wasn't for me, there'd be no hashtags.
Your fairy forever, Ada Lovelace.
Atoms or associations. Atoms or associations. Atoms or associations. Atoms or associations. Personal opinions or beliefs. Personal opinions or beliefs. Personal opinions or beliefs.
So I probably don't have much more time, but I was just going to quickly say, because I can't remember who mentioned the themes. Did you, Erinma? Well, I was just interested in like thinking about those themes with the work that I've created, and there was the kind of, I guess, the ones that really stood out for me was the deficit of surprise. So someone was asking about like famous people with their surname, and AI only selected men. So there was kind of this sort of inbuilt misogyny, I suppose. And then what was the other one that I thought of? The human-machine collaboration. I think that sort of creates like something about creating this interesting space. So we worked with some of Ada's words and letters and materials, and she wrote this letter, and like her kind of ending is quite tragic, really. She was kind of drug-induced and got into gambling and all sorts. And she wrote this letter, which is very difficult to translate, but you kind of get a sense that she's predicting the future of AI through this note. But we wanted it kind of spoken in a little bit more plain English. So we ended up putting that letter into AI and doing a translation, and that proved to be actually really useful for the piece of work itself, which was the last part of the extract. I guess that's all from me, but I'm happy to answer questions if it's not very clear.
And it's time for the Q&A. If I can invite Erinma, Sambourne and Tom to come back up. Amy, do we have anything online? Not yet. Okay, in which case, anybody in the room, there's a mic here, don't worry, your voice won't be amplified through it, it's for the people online. It's a very odd thing to hold and to speak into. Joe?
Hi, thank you all. It was so interesting to hear about. I wanted to pick up on something, Erinma, you said almost I think is a little bit of a throwaway, but to hear from all of you if it sparks anything, which was about kind of not always knowing when AI is present with us. And that's definitely something that I'm kind of aware of when I'm looking at like images or watching films or reading things, this sort of constant question of like, is this human or is this machine? And I just wondered if the project or your work had kind of explored that idea at all, like what it might mean for us to be in this sort of constant questioning of whether AI is there or not, like aside from the problems of it might being there, just the not knowing.
Do I just speak, or does it? No, I don't
We're
need that,
mic'd up.
No, I was just going to say that I think that we, as a group, got very interested in that idea, really, and I think that everyone became really frustrated with the way that AI would present itself, and so we kind of knew that this was didn't feel real or human, or the fragility of humanness, and I think that working with the material, working with AI with something that's non-human has made us feel much more connected to being human and not learn more about being human, but understand that more, I suppose.
I think I came across something similar to this in creating one of the podcast episodes. So I'm going to use the example of the I Am Echo Borg show from Rick Lander. And essentially, so the show is, you've got an actor, so that the Echo Borg, and it's played by Marie Helene. And she is just repeating the words from an AI chatbot. And she's called an Echo Borg. That's what that role is. And when you first think of that concept, I think, certainly I thought of it as, oh, it's a great piece of theatre, an Echo Borg, they're repeating the AI chatbot. And in one of the interviews I was talking to Rick, and he was saying, it's actually, this concept you do find it outside of the show. If you are lost somewhere and you get your phone out and you follow Google Maps and it creates the best path there and you're following the Google Maps directions and you're kind of an Echo Borg in that situation. And similarly, if a doctor uses some sort of software or some sort of AI to, scan, check a scan for tumours and they find something, and in another sense, they're an Echo Borg. So I think that touches on that sort of situation you're explaining, Joe. And that definitely, when I heard that, it really kind of broadened my mind as to what that concept could mean.
I guess for me, the project's been going for about, it feels like 4 years, I'm not sure. It took a long time to get the funding. And I feel like machine learning has become more pervasive in that 4 years. And so there's been instances, even like just the other day when I ordered a taxi on an app, and the taxi driver, I had a really kind of conversation with him. So I was, I said, look, you need to take a while. I'm going to take, I might forget things and go back in the house. And can you just switch off your engine and chill for a minute and I'll be out. But the app now has this thing, I think, where it tells the driver to go after 3 minutes and then they can get this £6. So I'd have this really reasonable conversation with the driver and I thought we'd got on really well and it's fine and the engine was off. And then I turned around and I was just about to get in the car and it went. And I thought, that wasn't me and him, that was something else, I think. And then even now, in LinkedIn and other things, it's saying, do you want to just run this through AI? And it's actually, no, maybe not. I'd like to write it myself. So I think it's become more pervasive, and I don't think that we know necessarily where it is and how it's interacting, but it's creating these moments where you think you've got an authentic connection going with a human, and actually it's not working. And then last 2 days, I've been hanging out with environmental scientists who are trying to model the weather. And they were talking about the errors in the moments in when it wasn't being able to measure things in the right way and the ways that they were trying to make guesses. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. That is kind of similar to these biases that we see in terms of discrimination and the other inherent biases. So there's something, and I don't think the public will know about that, about the errors that exist, except there's that, the documentary, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and the way in which those accounting practices didn't work, and you had the people on the phone going, no, it's working, it's fine, but that's people's lives ruined. So I think this is the challenge, is how do you figure out where the issues are? And this is where I always go to Black studies, queer studies, and solidarity across those epistemologies, because we know how whiteness works, and AI is a system that's been imagined from whiteness and that culture. Actually, that queer perspective and that queer take on it, that disabled take on it, that black take on it, I know how to then navigate that and think, okay, there's something systemic going on here. And it's that attention, I think, that needs to be paid, and that power that comes, not top down, but by communities coming together and go, I want to interrogate this. What is this app that I'm using? I'm not reading the small print, but this is what it's doing to me. So this is why this project, I really want the themes to resonate a bit more and go out in the world and do their unfinished work, because that collaboration between human and machine is important, to have that possibility of how do you say no to the app that's just telling the taxi driver to ride off, and that's me screwed for my ride to get to the hospital appointment, which I've then missed. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's going to be affecting us in many ways that will trip us up, that we don't quite know yet. And so I'm really interested to see more stories, to understand these kind of performances that will be happening, and thinking about how we fight it. And then Craig's residency here was really interesting about him kind of fighting with the machine to make music, and the pain and the creativity that he went through to make that work. And so I'd love to hear more of these kind of independent ways that we're working with these technologies to kind of figure out, as Stuart Hall would say, how, we know how we got here, we know the mess of colonialism, its legacy, but how the frick do you get out of it? And so it's those conversations that I think we need to take more deeply into our everyday lives and its persistence of machine learning. Really long answer. Apologies.
Very good answer. Amy?
I've just got a question from Verity online. Verity said, I was really struck by the quote that Erinma shared from Raymond Amaro, something about the insatiable appetite for the algorithmic and the desire to absence our responsibilities to AI. Does anyone have any thoughts about how we might resist or offer alternatives to this?
I couldn't hear, sorry. But
So Verity said, I was really struck by the quote that Erinma shared from Raymond Amaro, something about the insatiable appetite for the algorithmic and the desire to absent our responsibilities to AI. Does anyone have any thoughts about how we might resist or offer alternatives to this?
So I could go to thinking about tactics of resistance and an abolitionist perspective, where you think about we can think about abolition in terms of prisons and how we would actually think about I'm talking about love at the beginning of the session, rather than thinking about punishment. Actually, how do you inculcate love in a society? To consider, okay, who are the people that are going to jail? What do they not have in their lives? How do we bring that into their lives? So I would look to the abolition movement, and I would look to those tactics of resistance in the research itself. When we talked to independent artists and curators, they had tactics of resistance. So they wouldn't necessarily, and this was driven by their personal values. So they wouldn't necessarily go, okay, I'm going to scrape all the data sets off the internet to make my work. They would think about that as being unethical. They didn't want to do that. They would use smaller data sets, and they might draw on data sets, as Tom was talking about, Laurie Anderson, and their body of work. So they had ways to kind of work with it, but they'd also think about limiting how many runs they might do of a large language model, because they're thinking about the environment. And some artists don't necessarily use machine learning, but might critique it in their work and tell stories about that critique. So there's different ways, but I think we have to keep on coming up with new and more ways. So there's more detailed stuff in the technical report and the papers that are coming up where we'll be more specific about those examples of from practice. But we did do dialogues, didn't we, Sambourne, with people from Nigeria and India who gave us perspectives that we hadn't considered, because we're a project in England, and I always think if we've got the internet, let's go beyond. And it was really interesting to hear some stories about how during the pandemic, AI had been a way to make money in some parts of the world, but sometimes with some risk to it, where you could lose all your money. And so for rural, there were some stories about rural Indian farmers who were kind of finding ways to make money. So there was a new economy forming. So it's kind of not as straightforward as black and white, and there's these grey bits in between. But yeah, so there are some thoughts on how to resist, but I think there's also, it's a bit more nuanced, as it were.
Yeah, I'd kind of reiterate that point as well and say that in terms of tactics of resistance, there's lots of different examples, I think particularly in creative arts, especially loads of people working in the PM studio, for example, the More Than AI sandbox, and also like Tom and like Craig, there's loads of examples of people using AI and machine learning technology in really interesting ways, which they're different, and they try and play with it, they try and break it. And I think that the ideas that come out of those sorts of projects are really useful, and we can take a lot of learnings from them.
There's something as well entwined with this, which is just about disruption generally, I think, and I want to disrupt constantly in society because it is made for you know, a specific way of behaving. And I think if you constantly try and break that, then that will, you know, the AI is only responding to our kind of quite linear path that we're going on. At the end of the project with the adult company, there's this book that I've got that's just called like Perform Something New Every Day or something, and it just gives you these really random things to do. And so each one had to go off and do, you know, like walk into a shop and speak in a different accent, or, you know, like all these different weird things that just disrupt. And I want more of that.
Yeah, I actually just thought of I remember talking to Craig once. I'm fully stealing his quote and his idea here, so sorry, Craig. But I remember him telling me once that the current trajectory of AI, it's making everything more efficient, and it's taking the kind of status quo and like amplifying it. So it's taking one direction, it's going really quickly in that direction. Was his idea, or at least his work, was aiming to kind of break that up. So instead of using AI technology as a way of making everything more efficient or better in the status quo sorts of way, which has all sorts of issues and all sorts of problems, is to try and kind of broaden that up and have loads of different ways of doing things and ways of thinking. So I thought that was an interesting little idea as well.
Maybe linked to that, I remember waiting for a train to get to Bristol, and I had my app telling me what time the train was leaving. I had the timetable telling me what time the train was leaving, and I was like, oh my God, do I like, and the app was telling me one platform and the board was telling me another, and I was like, oh my God, am I going to make my train? And then I just thought, right, I'm just going to be more Craig. Craig's very calm. And I just thought, actually, I'm just going to actually use my eyes and look to see where is the actual train. Or I might just go and speak to the station person and say, like, where's the train? So, you know, this reliance on the technologies, actually, maybe we can rely on our own senses and be a bit more grounded in that. So, you know, thinking in that way too.
Okay, we've definitely got time for one more question.
Do I need the mic?
You do need the mic.
I was just gonna, I know you've mentioned a few times like this efficiency and the direction we're going in. I think a lot of the time when people talk about AI, they're talking about specifically like ChatGPT and like Gemini and like these very like machines and LLMs, large language models that are owned by corporations, and the open source space. Obviously it's not perfect, but you get like uncensored models and unaligned models, because alignment and like making the AIs ethical is supposedly like, oh, we're going to make them not do bad things, but it's also we're going to make them not tell you how to attack the government. We're going to make them not tell you how to overthrow things. So I was wondering how much you've delved into like the open source space and kind of moving away from the corporate stuff.
Sure.
Sorry. Oh, okay. I'll try to remember what I said. So I know you've mentioned like the ethics and efficiency. Yeah. So efficiency and like the basically making capitalism, making these things more efficient using AI, people using it at work. But part of that, I think, is that AI, especially from big corporations, is aligned so that it won't let people do like bad things, but bad things are often things that are upset like social peace. And so the open source space contains like unaligned models, or models that haven't, basically you can say anything and it won't go, oh, I can't tell you that. And I was wondering how much you've delved into like open source and whether you see also the environmental impact, I think, from open source is a lot less. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Stargate project, but it's like a gigawatt LLM server farm in the desert they're building using nuclear power. Anyway, yeah, sorry, I'll stop there. Just, yeah, about open source, basically, was my question.
So a lot of the artists that we spoke to were using they made choices around open source. We weren't specifically interested in what the technology is doing, more about the feelings and the emotions and the beliefs behind the cultures in which they were used. So we haven't delved into this tool over that tool, if that makes sense. It's not that kind of a project. But I have been hanging out in spaces with those people using open source in the environmental sciences. So in the kind of climate movement, a lot of the work is done with open source models, and these kind of questions come up. But the challenge for me is in hanging out with them for the last two days, and this is not necessarily linked to the project, but I want to try and take these conversations into different contexts. And that's part of impact. One of the challenges is that people were just making these models of the world and then hoping that somehow decision makers and policy makers would use these tools to figure out how the weather is. And actually, kind of I was like, what's your mechanism for connecting the tools and its outputs to like government or to policymakers or to communities? They're like, well, that's not our problem. And for me, that's the problem, is that, yes, it takes a lot of effort and time to train to become someone who can code and do all of these things, but there are a whole bunch of people who are just left out of that. And if we don't have these connections and collaborations between the different cultures of wanting to use these tools, actually, where does that take us, especially with climate change? And I'm just thinking, in terms of power and energy, will we get to a point where we build these amazing models of our world and actually they stop working because we don't have any power and we haven't invested in solar and and water. Do you see what I mean? So I think it's more about the culture. For me, it's about the cultures of use. I haven't personally had great experiences in the open source community. It's very difficult to kind of, I don't want to penetrate, it's the wrong word, Erinma. It's very difficult culture to kind of get into. I feel maybe this is like 5 years ago. But my issue is that consumers will not be necessarily using those products. They'll be using the commercial ones. And now Google, DeepMind, they're all at those conferences and they're sponsoring them. And so they're gradually getting into that area and there'll be kind of power dynamics there. So it's an interesting space to watch. How do we create a kind of commons around the use of these tools, whether they're coming from private or public open sources? So I think it's a space to watch, I would say, this connection between the public and the private. And then again, we can look to people like Elinor Ostrom, the Swedish economist who won a Nobel Prize. People probably don't even know her name necessarily, but there are different ways in which to kind of manage that space. So for me, it's that interaction, if you like, that needs to be considered, and that the public gets more involved, but not unpaid. I think there's new economies to come out of that. People want your data, and whether you wanted to give it to them or not.
Okay, I think we need to close it there. We're past 2. So join me in saying thank you to Erinma, Sambourne and Tom. Thank you. And a personal thank you very much. So 2 more talks in the calendar before the end of the academic year. Simon Morton in May and then Verity McIntosh in June. Just to stress, the deal we made with all the academics talking is that these are a different kind of talk to an internal School of Arts talk. We're recording some of them, we're making some of them hybrid, so keep an eye on the website. The format will change and alter a little bit as we go through. But thank you very much for giving me your lunchtime, and thank you online.